Hey friends, it's Kim.
And Kasey.
Welcome back to another edition of Questions We Get Asked All the Time, but special edition because we are doing rapid fire, well, as rapid as we can go, fire questions on resumes.
These
are very, very common questions that we end up getting, like inevitably, every single quarter, every single year. So we thought we would go through them for video content.
Resumes are confusing. There's a lot of resume opinions out there, and we're going to go through from our perspective as a technical recruiter and a software engineering hiring manager. There's a lot of resume advice out there, and someone will say that we're full of it.
Don't come for us. Okay?
This is resume opinions.
These are resume opinions from Kim and Kasey.
Yes.
Take everything with a grain of salt. And remember, anytime anybody gives you resume advice, you always take it with a grain of salt.
There is no such thing as a resume rule.
Yeah.
Except it has to be one page. That's a rule.
That's the one rule.
That's the one rule. Okay, sorry, I lied.
And just note that, look, if you are speaking to a recruiter at a very specific company and that's your dream company and you want to apply to a job at that company and that recruiter at that company says you must have XYZ on the resume to apply to our company, obviously listen to their advice. Even if
They're the most correct.
They are the most correct for that specific job application,
Yes.
even if it goes against some of the advice we give here.
Yeah.
Okay?
Absolutely.
This is like again, in our humble opinion,
In our
humble expert opinion, okay, if you're making a general resume for a software engineering job and you are a current college student studying in the United States.
Correct.
Should we get started?
Let's do it.
Okay, first question is, let's pull this out. Should I put my non-technical job experience on my resume?
A great question. So when you are filling out your resume as the hiring manager, I do want to see work experience or school experience or resume experience that is as most analogous to the role I'm trying to hire you for. But that being said, especially as a student, I don't expect you to have
the perfect background or experience for any entry-level job coming out of college.
You're a student. And so what I think about non-technical job experience is if you have a non-technical job that you became a leader in, you did for a really long time.
You're using to feed yourself or your family, or using it to support yourself. Really, to me, your resume should be a reflection of how you're using your time.
Yes.
And if you are in a situation where it requires you to spend a lot of time, say at a non-technical job because you need to support yourself, I absolutely want to know that as a recruiter. And I really, really value that. That actually helps me understand, okay, this person might not have some of the other more coveted experiences because you're reading between the lines, have an obligation or, have a requirement to, let's say, if you have to do a student work study for a scholarship or something.
Yes.
And we are very understanding of that and very much encourage y'all to represent that on your resume. I think what's really helpful is to explain how many hours a week you're dedicating, and that way we can really understand.
This is also helpful if you're really deep into that. For example, if you have to get a summer job and you're just doing some part-time summer job and it's not falling into this category, I don't care. I don't care about it. But if it's part of telling the story of how you're spending your time, you picked up some other good life skills, or my favorite, if it's just really unique.
Yes.
It's kind of fun. It gives me a little bit more picture of you.
Yes. So again, if it represents a significant amount of time that you need to spend, especially during the school year.
That's a good point, yeah.
Right? And it happens to be non-technical, absolutely we are okay with that. And again, encourage it so that your resume can represent a holistic experience of where you're putting your time.
Yeah, and it's not something you should be embarrassed about.
No, not at all.
It's part of being a balanced person. It's part of showing life experience, and that could be a real differentiator. I removed all of my non-technical stuff from my resume.
And then I put it back on.
And one of Kim's first things she did as my best friend was to rewrite my resume, and she put back on my most unique job, and it got just a little space at the very bottom of the resume. And I got asked about that every single time I talked to somebody, just because it was so interesting and different, and it really helped me stand out. So
yeah,
be you.
And again, I just want to reiterate, especially for jobs where it's hey, maybe you are serving at a restaurant, working hours at a grocery store. Again, anything that you're doing to support yourself, support your family, absolutely very highly valued from a college recruiting perspective. And honestly, if they don't value that or don't have empathy towards why you would need to be spending your time that way, then red flag. Okay. Okay. Amazing. Question number 2.
Okay, question number 2. Do I need a resume objective?
Okay, resume objectives, if you don't know what those are, they're like 1 to 2 sentences, typically towards the top of your resume, that state what kind of roles you're looking for and maybe kind of gives kind of a little like, you know, like exceptional student, currently pursuing, you know, like something like that, currently pursuing software engineering roles. You know, it's something more or less like that. They are something that I would consider required by like old school resumes.
A lot of older fashioned.
Yeah, a little older fashioned resumes typically, you know, always required that you had this to clearly state what jobs you're applying for. Now, if you are a computer science or computer engineering major applying to software engineering roles, you do not need to put an objective. And honestly, it kind of just wastes space. Like straight up, if you are on your resume going to put your educational institution and your major, and if I see that it's computer science and you have applied to the software engineering opening, it's going to be pretty obvious. It's going to be pretty obvious. The only time I say to put on an objective is if you aren't looking for software engineering roles, if you're maybe trying to more specialize in a different type of tech role, like maybe hardware, or if you're like wanting to do product or project management, like anything not software, but you're a CS or CE major, that's when I'd be like, and you're really adamant about it, I'd be like, yes, then put that as an objective so that, you know, your recruiters, when you're going to the career fair or you're just kind of meeting people generally, will understand like what you're interested in. If you are a student who's not studying computer science and not studying computer engineering, but you are applying to software engineering roles, I also would then encourage folks to put in an objective to make it really clear that like that is what you want.
Yeah, I think sometimes of an objective is a way to sort of clarify what might be a more non-traditional type of pathway. Like for example, I just rewrote my resume and I put what's called a resume summary at the top because I've had kind of parallel careers. And if you just look at the dates, it's very confusing. And so I have a couple sentences at the top that's like, yes, I was teaching while doing full-time work, just because it's really hard to communicate that just in a list of experiences.
But for the most part, though, as a college student, like your scenarios all look pretty similar, pretty basic. You don't have to worry about over-explaining stuff on your resume.
Yeah, this is truly 2 sentences max.
Like 2 sentences.
Yes.
Okay, next one. How important is the skills section, Kasey?
Okay.
How important?
I have deep opinions because I think the skills section is totally a waste of time.
This is where we're going to get controversial. This is probably the piece of advice we give the most that I'm pretty sure like other people who hear us give this advice like absolutely hate that we give this advice.
This is Kasey's opinion.
And clarify for them what a skills section, what we mean by that.
The reason I say this is when I say skills is it's very common for students to put a section that's called skills and then they just kind of dump every programming language, framework, technology they've ever touched in any class or any seminar or even looked it up, and they just kind of, it's like this word soup of like a bunch of things.
Yes.
And
like 10 languages. And it's like...
It kind of feels like, you know, back when you were like trying to build your resume in high school, how you would just jump into clubs to kind of like build up your resume.
Right. Where you're just trying to like collect accolades. For the sake of the resume.
Yeah.
The skill section can really feel like that. Also too, like, I see those skill sections where they rate how good they think they are, like a self-rating on like expert, level, beginner. And I for sure do not like that. That is deeply uncomfortable, mostly because one, most people don't rate themselves correctly.
Yes.
And two, even if you rate yourself correctly, then you're putting pressure on yourself to then perform at somebody else's subjective understanding of what your rating is. And it's just...
Yeah.
It sets weird expectations.
I used to have it on my resume where like I would rate things because I had, you know, sort of dabbled in this area, but I wanted to communicate I was really deep in this area. And the CTO of the startup that I got hired at, he told me, he was like, oh, whenever I see that, I get really excited because it's another piece of information for me to judge how self-aware they are. Mm. And he did tell me, he was like, you're a little bit of a unique situation, but even then we had to talk about it afterwards. And so I think it's
like, do we think her rating of herself is
accurate? Don't invite those questions.
Yes, don't invite those questions.
I take it off.
So 100% hard no on the rating, self-rating your skills. Now the skills section itself. Here's the thing, resumes should always be 1 page.
Yes.
The joke I always use is President Obama has a 1-page resume. We can have a 1-page resume.
Yes.
Like no recruiter.
No one's flipping the page.
No one's flipping the page. 2-page resume also because it gives this vibe of self-importance. We're not into it. So
sorry, if you're an undergrad, unless you're applying for a PhD program and you have to
or you have a Nobel Prize.
Yes, that's it.
If you have a Nobel Prize, you can have a
academic resumes are a little different, but like for companies, nobody will flip to the next page. And especially not if you're just coming out of school, you do not have enough.
So the thing about the skills section for us is we always discourage it because it feels like a waste of space that you should be using to articulate really like through your experiences the skills that you have. So like now if you are, you know, a freshman or just getting started and you're like, man, I really don't have a lot of experience to list or more significant things, and you're using the skill section as like a nice like plate like space filler, I'm like chill with that. I get that. You don't want a resume that looks empty, right? But as soon as you're starting to get more experiences, you should be replacing unnecessary space fillers with more like significant kind of like, you know, like things, right? So I much prefer that people use the experience section or the project section to explain the depth or the context in which they use certain skills or technologies.
Yeah. And you can even, I've seen people, you know, maybe emphasize the text of the specific
like
skills. Bold it. And
bold
actually
the language, bold the framework.
Yes. Like as like somebody that's scanning through, I'm always going to scan your experiences first. And I am looking for like, what language did you work in? What framework did you work in? And I believe the skills listed in the experience. I always tell students that sort of like word soup of skills. I don't believe any language after the third one. And I assume the third one's even a barely I know it. You cannot know that many languages that well. No professional developer does. Nobody cares about you collecting languages.
Yeah, that's it. We all care about how you used them. And if you don't have an experience that feels significant or important enough to list on your resume using that skill, it's like not a skill you should talk about because it probably means you don't actually have the enough depth to be able to talk about it in an interview setting that is going to satisfy whoever is questioning you about it.
Yeah.
Like the last thing you want, right, is like to have this list of like skills and then an interviewer to like zoom in on like for whatever reason, like the one that you're least good at and start poking you about it. Again, just don't invite.
Don't invite.
We do not put significance on having a lot of different skills. It's just a piece of information. We all know you're coding in some kind of object-oriented programming language. Like we know that is happening.
Yeah. I care much more you coming out of undergrad with a depth within a singular language because breadth will come later in your career. And for example, like we did a series of different things within a single course. So I worked on it for a couple weeks. I don't care about it.
And I will say before we move on to the next one, here's the real reason why you do not need to worry about the skills section because companies don't actually care about your skills. We are not hiring you because you're an expert in Haskell or whatever it is you want to put, or CSS or whatever it is that you're putting on there, right? Like it is just, they are just trying butts and seats. That should just be like a little motto that I have out here, butts and seats. Like, you know, they just care that you are good enough, that you can learn, you have good communication skills. They're not hiring you because you're an expert in any given skill or language. Now, once you become more of a working professional, maybe like 2 years, 3 years into your degree, into your career, that becomes more important because you're starting to truly specialize.
Yes.
But no college student, again, unless you have a Nobel Prize, I know that's like an exaggeration, but unless you have invested,
Turing Award,
like, or just again like 3+ years in a research lab and on your way to a PhD, like you have not collected enough experience for a company to care about your actual background yet, right? So I think that's one where I think a lot of dads are like, no, you need to list the skills. Like, that's obviously something that they need to know. It's like, we just need to know that you're coding.
It's a little bit of a previous resume generation. Yes.
Okay, next one.
Okay.
Speaking of advice that dads give that I don't know if you should listen to, is it important to show a complete employment history with no gaps?
I respect that once upon a time, showing no gaps on a resume was like the penultimate most important rule. I also think that's true in other industries. No, I don't care. Especially, we have plenty of incredible friends that have plenty of gaps in their employment history. That's
I have
fine.
gaps.
I have gaps.
Like,
and the thing too is also as a student, that's your job.
That's your job. Yeah, being a full-time student is your job. I actually don't expect most students to have jobs while they are working. So just like, let's just start baseline there. As a college student, we don't care if you have gaps of employment on your resume because you're already in a full-time student situation. Yeah. Now, even if you are a working professional in our industry and have gaps, actually, like, it's almost kind of weird if you don't, because so many of us like take sabbaticals or just take time away and like, you know,
do some personal projects or whatever.
Just take a break. And because honestly, just straight up, because our industry is so high paying, a lot more people can truly afford to take that time off. And because the skills, software engineering skills, are so coveted in our industry, there are just so many jobs that are willing, like really the importance is, do you have the skill?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of my friends told me their like secret about this one, if they're ever asked about gaps, they were like, if anyone asks you why you have a gap, you just say, I was under NDA and I can't talk about that project at this time.
Okay, that is an incredible answer to that question. Again, something you would use later in your career. Again, as a student, don't even sweat this. It won't make any sense. You don't, but that's, I'm going to put that away for later. But I'm like, that hustle,
I'm here for it.
I'll put that away for later.
Okay. Ooh, okay. How far back should my experience history go?
Okay. This is an interesting one because I know everyone's always, again, I think this one comes from like nervousness around making sure you're representing everything that you're doing, or feeling like, can I put something on the resume that's from a long time ago, but like it is really significant and I just want to show it off. Here's where I'm going to start. As a college student, most of your things, the vast majority of things, should come from your time in college. Now, if you are a college freshman just starting college, it is okay to have some high school things on your resume. And I mean like, significant high school, you were a leader in DECA or you went to state for whatever. Yeah. Like, when you are a freshman, you get a pass and you are totally welcome to put things from high school onto your resume.
Because you haven't had a chance to build a resume in college yet. We get that.
Yes. Once you enter sophomore year, though, your second year of school, it should transition over to all college experiences, right? So what does that tell you? That tells you that freshman year, I know, in addition to like getting used to being in college, like having a severe uptick in like the complexity of classes, you should also be thinking about spending time, your own time, on experiences that you'll be able to put onto your resume later.
Yes. And that sort of transition applies to, when you are applying from college to industry, it's all college stuff. And then after graduation, your industry resume, that better be all industry.
Exactly. Similar. So, as far as, I think we pretty much answered that question. Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Can I put class projects on my resume?
I have feelings about this one. But I will start with, if you are a computer science major or computer engineering major and you are pursuing those degrees, we know you are all taking classes that have class projects, right?
And you are probably all doing the same class projects.
So I always see, the like, what is it? The like flight scheduling tool.
Husky Maps.
Right? Just, here's the thing, like, your resume, you should try to, one, I kind of kick this video off saying, it's really a reflection of how you're spending your time outside of class to build your skills, right? And we do have an expectation, a baseline expectation, that you are going above and beyond just what you're getting in school.
Yeah. Which is, I know, a lot to ask, but you're in the pool with everybody that's also going to class, meaning you have to find time outside of class to stand out.
Yes. And like whatever it is you decide to do is unique to you.
Yeah.
But what's not unique to you? Class projects. So, if you are, again, like early in your academic career, or like also, in this situation, kind of circling back to, hey, Kim and Kasey, I don't have a lot of time outside of class. I have obligations. Like I've met a lot of working parents in school, especially, which is incredible. Shout out to parents also going to school is what I'm trying to say. Because when you are going to school, you are a working parent. Yeah. But like, it's, absolutely wild to me, like, or if you have other obligations that prevent you from doing those types of projects. Yeah. Outside of class, yes, class projects, totally fine. Try to pick either your favorite or something where you felt like you got a lot of, you spent a lot of time, got a lot out of it personally.
Yeah. Right? I mean, I know I'm biased. I'm a professor, and I do have a class project that I designed specifically to help students put it on their resume. And so to me, I only want to see a class project if you worked on it for at least 3 weeks, preferably 4.
Yeah. I say 40 hours.
I agree.
You put 40 hours into it, it is like meaty enough for you to like
also
have a good conversation about it.
Group projects. Solo projects are cool, but I really care a lot more about group projects.
And you being able to explain exactly what you did on the group project, right?
What's your role?
I will say, actually, this one time I was doing a recruiter screen and somebody had like a class project on their resume. And I was like, oh, this class project, can you tell me a little bit more about it? And I don't know if it was nerves or this person really struggled with even just being able to give me the high level basics, even though it was like literally written down on the resume. And I think they were trying not to like read the bullets and try to like explain it. But again, it was like okay, you probably did this project a really long time ago and you're having a hard time like bringing up the details.
Maybe you weren't the main contributor to that project because that's how it comes off.
Be judicious about what projects you are picking and making sure that it is something you feel really comfortable talking about and can talk in depth. Now, as you get other experiences on your resume that show off your skill building outside of class, you should replace class project should be the first thing to go, unless that class project is like a senior level capstone quality project.
Like it's a whole semester long, quarter long. Yes,
that's the only time that I'm like, for sure.
Thesis or something like that. Absolutely. And a friend reminder, don't put anything on your resume you're not ready to talk about.
Yes. No, for real. It's like being caught with your pants down. It's not fun. Ooh, Kasey, this one actually is especially for you.
Okay, all right.
Should I put my GPA on my resume?
Okay.
Should I put my GPA on my resume?
I'm going to give you Kasey's opinion and Kasey's experience. I have a very strong opinion. I think unless your GPA is at least a 3.5, I actually would prefer 3.7 or above. Leave it off.
Okay, my bar is more like a 3.0. Even we disagree. Even we disagree.
The reason I say that is because to me that just invites more questions. Every school, also part of my job for a long time was traveling to different computer science departments, and I can tell you that GPA is so varied. I'm sorry, but there's lots of schools that have grade inflation, and those grades just are meaningless. And I won't speak about other schools, but at the University of Washington, we do not have grade inflation. And so you're right. A 3.2 at UW is a really good GPA.
Yeah.
But other people might not interpret it that way. And so that's why I always say, don't invite those questions. Some companies will ask you for it. Let them ask. I personally have a very low undergraduate GPA.
What is it, Kasey?
It was a 1.9.
Out of a 4.0, guys. You heard that right. 1.9.
A big reason for that is I was working multiple jobs to support myself and a family of 4 while going to school. And
so it's intense.
I did not have time to do well in my classes. And that number on my resume would have been really difficult.
It would have been detracting.
And so I filled my resume to explain how I was spending my time. Otherwise, if somebody asked me, I'm happy to talk about it, but I would rather tell the story after being asked than somebody see that at the very top of my resume.
And make assumptions.
And
listen, Case, you got all the same jobs, got all the same opportunities that like everyone else did. In fact, like was making more than like most of us. Like
I am a professor now.
Yes. And is a professor who teaches these classes. So, my bar is a little bit different. I say in my professional recruiting experience, humble opinion, I think it's if you have a 3.0 and above, Gucci, put that on there. I think there's something about the number 2 that really freaks people out. And to be clear, if you have a below 3.0 GPA, we are not saying that you should feel any kind of way about it or feel like you're not, more deserving or, like better equipped. Like you're going to be fine. There are plenty of people who like the GPA is like, it's not an indication of whether or not you're going to be successful in the workforce.
I always just say GPA is a measure of how effective you've been able to be a student.
In the system.
And there's a million reasons why that time or that system didn't work for you. A high GPA tells me you're a really good student. A low GPA tells me nothing.
Yeah. It just means that like, hey, like there's other ways that you have been building these skills, right? So, my opinion is if it's below a 3.0, like just leave it off. Leave it off. And again, like, you know, if companies really need it, they can ask you for it. And otherwise, like, you know, and my expectation too is that if you don't have a GPA that is necessarily as high, that you have a wider breadth of other experiences that's demonstrating your skill.
Yes.
Right? Like whether that be TAing or research or like what have you, hackathons, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Right?
For
like
context, I only ever had one company ask me for my GPA after I left it off. They chose to interview me anyway because I was acting as the head TA during that time. So I had a lot of ways to demonstrate that I had mastery of those topics. And then I had a whole story about how I was balancing my life with my family and my jobs as to why my GPA was not reflective of how I spent my time at school.
Yeah.
Okay. And our final question for this video, what is more helpful on my resume? Classes, research, or TA?
This is an interesting one. I think that a lot of students, and I think really the spirit of this question is like, where should I be investing my time?
Yeah.
What are the things that recruiters are like really looking for? Like, I know that there's like a lot of like kind of anxiety around like picking the exact right thing.
Yes.
Right. And from a recruiting perspective, I actually don't care exactly which one of these things you do, but you have to be doing one of them. And when I say one of them, when I say them, I mean an experience outside of the classroom that shows you're dedicating yourself to building your skills. You need to have just one solid one. If you have two, amazing. But like, really, we just need one. And that one that you pick, if you're going for software engineering jobs, it should somehow be software engineering related, right? That's kind of like a no-brainer. But there are a ton of options for you to demonstrate that skill, and you should pick the one that genuinely interests you the most, or that you genuinely feel that you can stay committed to, that you genuinely feel like you can like speak to in a way that shows that you're excited. You should never be doing something out of obligation or because you think it's going to look good, because if that's your motivation, you can almost always tell when you're poking someone about it that like something's off.
And students tend to do that a lot. Again, I think it's a little like leftover from the trying to get into undergrad hustle from high school, where it sort of feels like you're like,
you have to check these specific boxes, right? We like lived in a world where it was like, you got to have volunteer, you got to have
club, sport, whatever.
Sport. Like,
and I think
that's not how it's much more flexible.
This is much more, to me, from a hiring manager perspective. I care actually a lot more about depth. Like, I want to see that you pick something you're passionate about, you spent multiple years on it, you grew in a leadership role within it, whether that's your research lab or being a TA, or maybe you have a personal project, or you're part of a club, or whatever it is. But Kim's right, some outside of class project where you can get in deep and you can demonstrate sort of the intersectionality in your interests and your skill sets and show growth. That's what we're looking for. And I'd much rather have one of those than a grab bag of a bunch of stuff you didn't do at a very deep level.
Yeah. So the truth is like any of these things like will be solid. Pick one that like you are genuinely like into.
And if you're also, again, kind of thinking of it from like the hiring manager perspective, if you really want to stack rank them, start a stack rank based on like what's the most analogous to the job you're applying to.
So the most analogous would be like an internship.
Which makes sense, right? And if it's not an internship, totally fine. Maybe then it's research, which is very similar. You're working in a group on software. If it's not, maybe being a TA, like reviewing code all the time, talking about code all the time.
And honestly, like with TAs too, like, you know, TAs tend to really interview really well, which is something that recruiters typically look for.
Yeah. So whatever it is, pick something you actually want to spend a lot of time doing. Let yourself get really deep into it. Because also too, we're trying to like distinguish across a lot of students. And it's a lot easier for my brain to remember like, oh, that's that student that was the head TA, like they were really into TAing. Or, oh, that's that student that's doing this really cool research project. I'm only going to probably remember like one thing.
Yeah.
And so make that thing really good and really unique and really help you shine.
Yeah. I think that's it as far as questions we get asked all the time about resumes, y'all.
At least for now.
Yeah. If you have more, please put them in the comments below. We are constantly trying to collect this so we can, you know, make more content like this for you guys. Stick around our channel. We have lots of resources on how to interview for software engineering jobs and how to navigate the recruiting process. Yes. Until then, I'm Kim.
And I'm Kasey.
We got your back.